My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Alisa Lee. We're at Keeler Estate Vineyard in Amity. It's June 16, 2022. Alisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me finally.
I know, it feels like we've known each other forever. First question is, why wine?
Well, it never was on my path. I think much like a lot of people in this industry. I started off in the outdoor industry, actually, selling outdoor goods, corporate, and then much like a lot of people in this industry, including my friends, I went down the culinary path. So I graduated from culinary school, brought me here to Portland, met a lot of good people, which I am still really good friends with to this day in this industry. Restaurant managed, realized that I didn't want to be a slave to the corporate world, and my mental health and my physical health was more important to me. And from there I kind of took on a little bit of wine while I was restaurant managing, the wine list, and then decided to get out into the industry, and that was about early 2010, late 2009, and got my first start in the tasting room at Tory Moore, and alongside that with the tasting room at Carlton with Jay McDonald. So that's where it all began.
Tell me about your sort of initial impressions of wine as you started to learn about it. Was there anything exciting about it to you? Was there anything you wanted to know more about?
I think the initial shock was, the movie Sideways came out. Everybody was interested in Pinot Noir, and I actually had liked Pinot for quite some time. So I think a lot of people thought it was kitschy as they were first starting to come out to the wine country. It was very small, especially in Dundee when I was first starting off. I mean, I think there were less than 100 tasting rooms and or wineries, and now I don't even know where to even count. But the romance of it was still there. I mean, it still is there. It's just on a very larger scale now. But it's just everything that came with wine, just from opening the bottles, the labels, to what it took, to the farming practices, to being out in the vineyard, to seeing people work hard to bring that fruit to the winery, to process it, to watch it go through fermentation, and then to watch all that labor sit in a cellar for months, and then to see it come to fruition and put it into bottle and finally drink it was just something that was always kind of, that curiosity sparked in me at some point. Which is why I made the move into the cellar rather than working front of the house per se.
Before we get to that, I'm curious about, with the culinary education and then like you mentioned kind of restaurant management, what was your sort of formal wine training? What did you have to know to run a wine program?
Well, I did the restaurant management studies at Le Cordon Bleu, and they gave you a couple of classes that were wine-related, wine studies, and one of our instructors was actually a winemaker out in the valley, and he kind of set us up for learning about wines, nuances. They did wine tastings, but it wasn't until you actually put yourself out there to go wine tasting, to actually learn about wine. Because obviously with any school that you go to, they set you up with giant textbooks, like, here, read this. You're not going to read a 2,000-page book on wine, right? Like, come on. But it's just basically up to whoever, if you wanted to learn on your own. And some of us really liked it, some of us really didn't. So I think that's where I was just more interested in the wine aspect than I was in the food aspect. I mean, initially, I wanted to open my own catering company, but recession. So Yeah.
It's interesting timing for that
Yes.
dream there.
Yeah.
Tell me about the first experience in the wine industry. You mentioned Tory Moore and Carlton. What was it like? What did you think of it as you were getting into the work and getting into the industry?
Well, I didn't have a very good experience interviewing with one of the first companies that I wanted to work for, and that actually worked out for the best because I ended up working for Tory Moore for a few years, and I'm still have good relationships with them to this day. And Dr. Olson, was always very good to me, and I was able to learn a lot. And under Jacques Tardy, his winemaking process there was actually very helpful. It was one of the first vintages I ever did was under him. So.
And you mentioned like moving from sort of front of house to back of house. What prompted that move for you, and what was the kind of the initial cellar experience like?
Honestly, it was just a lot more people coming out to the industry to just taste. And I think years in the restaurant industry just made me not want to talk to people as much anymore and just kind of want to do the work. And I've always been the creative type. Even when I was a kid, I always liked to make things, build things. So I think that's where I thrive the most, is when I'm actually making things and I'm seeing things from start to finish, basically.
What was your impression of the work in the cellar?
Oh, it's so tough. It's backbreaking. And, years of doing it, I recently just had surgery on my arm, so I'm going to have my left arm done next year. But, it's worth it, right? I don't know. It's pain. Maybe I'm a masochist, but I think that's why a lot of us are still in the industry. There's just something that ties us to it.
So it's an interesting point because we hear that a lot. The work doesn't sound terribly glamorous, and yet it's very addicting to some people. So I'm curious, what was it about the actual work that made it worth it, made it exciting?
Well, I think it's not always changing, but it's not always predictable either. I think for me, I've been lucky enough to have been cross-trained in so many departments to where no day is ever the same for me. So I could, work in the tasting room, I could work in the vineyard, I could work in the cellar, I could do sales, so it changes. But I think that's what the challenge is for me. I think if I were to be in a position where I had to do the same thing every day, I'd probably get really bored, which is why I choose to work for the smaller purveyors. So.
Who were some of the people, you mentioned Jacques Tardy, you mentioned Jay McDonald, who were some of the people that you met / were impressed by as you were coming into the industry, and what did you learn from them about the work and the industry?
Well, Mo Ayub, who is a dear friend of mine, as well as his winemaking was impressive to me. Definitely a lot of the winemakers I've worked for, the one thing that has always stuck with me is cleanliness. I wouldn't say anal retentiveness, but this just sense of OCD about keeping a cellar clean and keeping your wines clean, and in turn you'll make beautiful wines. So, but that's how I've been very fortunate to have these relationships with people throughout the years and learning.
What were the biggest things that you had to learn then coming into the cellar in that way? Obviously, you had a background in wine. What are the biggest things you had to learn to work sort of back of house in the cellar, and what are were there like notable experiences along the way that kind of stand out to you?
Well, for one, being a female in the cellar, I think is the biggest thing, and it still is a thing to this day that a lot of women have to deal with, unfortunately. It just is part of the industry, and I hate to say it, But, I think women have fought their way to be where they are in this industry, and we make damn good wine. So,
Has that gotten better?
yes. I think it definitely has gotten better, but obviously there are places where it's still old school and, but it's definitely an industry where you can't be soft.
Take me through kind of the progression for you then from those first couple of jobs. Where did you go next? What were some of the roles that you've held, and were there sort of ones that were of special importance to you?
Well, I've been everywhere. I've gone to Rex Hill A to Z. I've been supervisors. I've gone to New Zealand twice for the same company as a supervisor. Being able to travel is definitely something I miss. Just being kind of a cellar rat and, just going hemisphere to hemisphere but
Tell me about the New Zealand experience. You mentioned that. What was different about it? What was similar about it to working here?
I think for me, going at an older age was a little different just because everybody else that's there is at least 10 years younger than you. And so it was quite the experience just because I was chosen to go over there by the winemaker. And it was probably one of the best experiences I've had in my life. And it was a brand new facility. They make beautiful wines there. But to be in a new country and to experience a different culture is something that I wish everybody could be able to experience at least once in their life.
Tell me about what brought you here then. What brought you to working here with Nicholas?
Well, there's another friend of ours in the industry. She's also a winemaker. She makes amazing wines. Wynn Peterson Nedry. So we're all connected in some way, and she told me that Nicholas needed maybe a hand, and reached out, and here I am, his assistant winemaker now. So.
And tell me what that entails.
That entails helping make his wines, taking care of his wines, making sure that his wine club is fulfilled. Tastings, reaching out to distributors. I'm a woman of many hats. So.
You mentioned you were kind of attracted to smaller brands working for so tell me about Nicholas's brand Authentique and what appeals about it to you and what kind of changes you've seen with it.
Well, he does less than 2,500 cases generally, and he's generally very, his wines are, hands off. He likes to experiment with a lot of, upright vessels, lots of cement, eggs, amphoras. So I like the variety of fermenting vessels that he decides to use in his program. It's different than most people. I think a lot of people are experimenting more with amphora and or cement vessels of sorts, but I just think the way that he makes his wines are beautiful, and I generally choose to only work for winemakers that I love drinking their wines.
With all the people you've worked for, have you developed like a winemaking sort of philosophy or style that you prefer? Is there a way you want to approach a wine?
Definitely. I tend to lean more on the higher acid side of winemaking. But that is to say it differs every year. But I think that's generally kind of the way I like to make wines.
Is that for food friendliness?
Yes.
with all the different people you've worked for, obviously, you're always you're helping fulfill someone's vision, right? You're helping fulfill. How do you kind of find your role in the different various cellars you've worked in? How do you find like the piece you play, the role you play?
I find the role I play is the fulfiller. I feel like I'm the piece that holds everyone together.
And how does that? How? Give me an example.
Well, when people start to panic about anything, I'm usually there, and I usually get things done, and everybody can chill out for the most part. Or I'd like to think that they'd be able to. I have a way of getting things done.
It's like a secret weapon.
Kind of.
All right, I like that. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about 2020 and the last couple of years. What was your role during 2020 in the industry, and how did you sort of see it affect both your work and the industry in general?
So I actually took a couple of years off, but I did help. I came and helped bottle and do a couple of ferments for some people, but I was present during the 2020 vintage. I did see how it affected a lot of people's wines. I saw how they reacted. Many people either dumped their 2020s or they sold them off, or some decided to bottle them. The ones that chose to bottle them, I think, made a wise decision because everybody always wants, especially wine club, everybody wants to keep a vertical going. I think it would be interesting to revisit the 2020s down the road just to see, because Oregon's never experienced a vintage like that, a fire vintage per se. So just to see how the smoke affected the wines.
And how do you see the industry coming out of that? Getting now that we're kind of at that point where those wines should be coming into the market, what does the industry kind of look like right now?
I think the industry is hurting a little bit as far as having things to sell. So I think everyone's trying to push to get 2021s bottled, which may be a little premature, but I think they'll recover from it. But that's why a lot of distributors are coming out and they're tasting wines right now, because they're scrambling to recover from the loss of 2020.
Let's talk about then what comes next. What about for yourself? You're here. Do you have plans or goals beyond this? Do you have something you'd like to do in the future?
Well, I can't do this forever. So I don't know, maybe finally open up that food truck or my kimchi ferment that I've always wanted to do. But anytime I try to leave wine, I always get pulled back in, so.
Any thoughts on your own brand?
I have a few.
And what about as you look ahead for the industry itself? What comes next for Oregon wine?
It just keeps growing. I don't know what comes next. It seems like any time you think it's going to slow down, it just seems to expand even more. And people are planting where you never thought anything could be planted. So, and with the weather changing the way that it has, I'm not going to say the word, but, we're going to be able to plant lower elevations, and I think it's just going to expand and grow beyond anything that we've ever seen.
Is there anything you'd like for the industry to grow into? Something, a change you'd like to see, or kind of a goal on the horizon?
Better pay for everybody in this industry.
I've been hearing that a lot lately. Is that something that's doable here?
Oh, it's doable. It's just...
It hasn't been done.
Yeah, I think so.
What about, is there something on the horizon that makes you trepidatious, or something you're fearful of for Oregon wine?
Just fires.
Yeah. If someone were to ask you your advice or words of wisdom on joining the Oregon wine industry, what would you tell them?
Oof. Wow. I would say I would ask them many questions on whether whether it's something that they really wanted to do and they knew that they wanted to do, whether or not they wanted to actually put the work into it, because it's not the type of industry where you can just try it out and think that you're gonna like it. Because as you've met many of us, a lot of us have been in it for a long time, and those that have just started out have either kind of figured out that they're going to stay either in the front of the house or they're going to stay in the cellar. So I think it's different now. It's like starting off in a restaurant. Like you start off as a busser and or like a hostess, and then you work your way up. Like now I think it's difficult to do that. You can't really make that dive as easy. The transition is not as easy, I don't think.
What would you suggest if given the choice? What should your first step into the industry be?
Well, if you want to be a winemaker, then definitely you have to try out the cellar and give out a vintage a try, and know that you're probably going to cry. So
Right. That's all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we should have covered here today that we didn't cover?
no, I don't think so.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sharing your story with us and sharing this beautiful space with us. And we'll go and let you off the hook.
Thanks.
Thank you.